listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
It is the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik coming at you. Mark, great to have you on the program to discuss a lot of things that you've lived through as a former general manager of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and you're seeing it in 2024 football. So it's not new to you, but it might be new to some out there. And I want to start with Atlanta. And we saw the big quarterback change this week with Kirk Cousins being benched, Michael Penix Jr. getting his first career start. It went well, at least for the team. 34-7 victory over the Giants. They now control their own destiny to win the NFC South if they can beat DC and beat Carolina to wrap up the year. What was your take on it? And what did you see from it in week one, the new experience that's the Michael Penix Jr. experience?
Well, you know what? My take from it is they were fortunate to get the victory, and they were fortunate to play the Giants, and that's huge. And if you're going to make that decision, probably the best team to play in the National Football League right now, sadly, is the Giants. They feel like the worst team. They certainly have got the number one pick right now as we sit here today in the draft for a reason, and they have lots of needs of the team. So I never agreed that I thought it was the right time or the right decision. I don't have anything against Michael Penix. I have a lot more thoughts that Kirk Cousins, I think, could work himself through this. And because of his experience and because the postseason's right around the corner, and because they still have, they still had a shot at getting to the postseason, I thought it was a little early. I think if they were officially eliminated from the postseason, then I would have put Michael Penix in right away and just said, finish out the season. Let's figure out what we're going to do. In this situation, I think the best way to say it is this, Dave, Kirk Cousins walking into this game had thrown 1 touchdown, 9 interceptions.
Right.
If he'd have had the same line as Michael Penix, it'd be now 1 touchdown, 10 interceptions, right? But they got the victory. So it would have been 2 wins, but still bad stats. The Atlanta Falcons figured out the guy behind the quarterback is kind of important. That's that running back. And they did a great job of running the ball, and they played really good defense. And Michael Penix didn't have, bad play after bad play after bad play. It wasn't, so to speak, a Will Levis type of showing where you see the 2 or 3 turnovers no matter what every game. It wasn't like that. So Michael did okay for the role he was put into. I think Kirk Cousins wins that game just as easily as Michael Penix does. But it was a big decision. And, was it the right one for Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris? Time will tell, right? We're going to get a good sense, I think, in a real game that's going to have real juice this next week against the Commanders. We'll get a real good feeling, and it'll be nice for Michael Penix. It's not his first snap. It's not his first situation. And I've been part of this before. As you mentioned, like when I was a rookie GM and I had a rookie head coach named Raheem Morris, we had a rookie quarterback. And it was Josh Freeman. We had a plan going into the season. We weren't going to play Josh until we felt like he was ready, no matter what we were going to play week one. He was the best quarterback on our roster, bar none. But we knew we weren't going to just throw him out on the field week one. We wanted him to wait, mature, grow, see how things work, see how coordinators, come at you as a young quarterback, see how Byron Leftwich, prepared for games back then when he was our quarterback, or Josh McCown, and those guys. And so it was important to let Josh kind of grow. We got to Game 6 in London, and we're playing the Patriots, and we're getting beat pretty good, 35-14 or something. And he followed up to the box. Yeah, it's the Patriots. They were really good. But, the scary thing, we had not won yet, Dave. So this is the interesting. We're 0-6. We're playing the Patriots, or 0-5 playing the Patriots. The week before, the Patriots beat the Tennessee Titans 62-7.
Oh.
And so I'm sitting there going, we're going to go to London, and this could be, a London massacre. But we were at 35-14. Coach Morris, there's 8, I don't remember how many minutes left in the game. Coach Morris calls up, and I get on the headset, and I just talk to him real quick. And he's like, hey, look, I'm thinking about playing Josh Freeman. And I said, yeah, let's go ahead. Let's do it. So it was important for him to communicate. And I think in this situation, they did the same thing. I have a feeling after the game, even though they beat the Raiders, and it wasn't a very pretty game, they felt like they needed a spark on offense. And so I bet you on the flight home, Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris sat down and talked about it and convinced them to say, let's make this move. Then you have to talk to ownership, right? And you've got to sit down and talk to Arthur Blank and explain everything. Why this is the right move, why this is the right time. How do we handle Kirk going forward? What can we get for Kirk? All those things you need to think about and be able to answer. Do you want him in the building anymore? Or does he walk away? Like, do you send him home? That kind of stuff. You have to figure out those things. And I think for Atlanta, they got through all those questions. And they told Arthur Blank, look, we're ready to make this move. We were happy about Michael Penix at the beginning of the season, and I'm sure they had conversation, right? Remember, in the preseason, Penix only played in 1 game. Right. For a guy that knew wasn't going to be the starter, you just thought, well, they'll play him in all 3 preseason games just to get him snaps. They didn't. They felt very comfortable with him early on in their, obviously views during the summer and certainly in training camp that they're like, this is a good player. And so when they made the move, they just explained to Arthur Blank, we're probably not going to get a draft pick for him. And, he's got the roster bonus, and Arthur Blank might have said, like, why wouldn't you get a draft pick, at least like a 6th or a 7th? Because he's got a no trade clause. And that's the only thing that Kirk Cousins can do right now to kind of like give it back to the Atlanta Falcons and saying, hey, look, I'm not letting you get a pick too. Like, you just embarrassed me in my career. I'm going to say I don't want to get traded anywhere. I don't care what team it is. I'm going to not go because all I have to do is wait till after you cut me. Then I can go to that same team and just not give you the pick. And so you got to explain to Arthur Blank, like, we're not going to get anything for him. So we'll just cut him before the roster bonus is due. The only way that Kirk Cousins sees the field is if Michael Penix goes down with an injury over the next couple of weeks or into the postseason. But we need him around because we are in the hunt. And so I want to keep him in the building. So then my job as Terry Fontenot will be, as we all agree that we're going to make this move and go with the rookie, is I'm going to handle the agent. Raheem's going to handle the player. And that's where we're going to do it. And we're going to do it at the same time where, I'm going to call the player up. I'm going to call the agent so that everybody's getting notified at the same time what's going on. Because it's not going to be a good conversation. Now with the agent, it's not fun. It's not going to be a fun call because you're like, wait a second. 9 months ago, you were hoping I'd get to free agency. 9 months later, you're telling me I'm benched and we're, sitting there at 6 and 7 to have a chance to make the postseason. And people are allowed to have bad games or bad streaks. And I'm sure Kirk was hard too. I'm sure he was in disbelief and sitting there going, as he said quickly, I didn't forget how to play football, but I'll do the best I can. And so now Kirk Cousins knows he's auditioning for, other clubs, 30 of them, 31 of them, possibly. And so, he's got to say the right things, do the right things. But internally, this is a bad feeling for Kirk Cousins and a surprising outcome. We'll see how Atlanta does. And hopefully Michael Penix just continues to grow.
It's fascinating. I don't think anybody could have sat here with the big news, the big splash. You get Kirk in free agency, and then 15 weeks into a 17-game season, he's not going to be on the roster come March with that $10 million signing bonus that you're talking to. And that's fascinating. The GM, like you, will deal with the agent, and the head coach will deal with the player. That's the dynamic that's going on right now in the ATL. But again, if they beat DC and if they beat Carolina, Atlanta will get that 4th spot in the NFC, which is also pretty bizarre because Tampa Bay had designs on the 4th spot of winning that division. They give up the opportunity to control their own destiny, even though you can't control destiny. With losing to the Cowboys 26-24 on Sunday Night Football. Mark, what's the takeaway there? Because I don't think a lot of people saw that come.
Yeah, I didn't see that either. I felt like Tampa had been playing very consistent. Dallas kind of been a little bit up and down, certainly a frustrating season across the board. The injuries and everything that's happened to Dallas, you felt like, well, are they really going to do this? Tampa came in, they still ran the ball. I mean, they still ran the ball, and the game was fairly close. And, it reminds you that Dallas has a talented roster, and they're fighting through it. We talked about CeeDee Lamb, what he's been able to accomplish. What he did last night was a big part of the puzzle. It shows me that, having Micah Parsons out there, but it shows me that Dallas is learning a lot about their football team as they're still trying to be competitive. Because know this, they walked on that football field knowing they were officially now eliminated because of what happened with the Commanders game and that they were no longer having a chance to still at least be in the hunt. But yet they went out there and they hunted and they played hard. And they found players that step up, like a Brock Hoffman has done a very good job at guard, who's the guy that you're like, wait, we didn't know who he was. He played a little center, played a little guard, but it turns out he's a pretty good little player. That's been a silver lining for a very ugly season. This was a team that I absolutely thought was in the postseason. I absolutely thought they'd win the division. And so I think it speaks volumes to Mike McCarthy and his ability of what he's been able to do there. Look just within their own division. Brian Daboll's team has shut down. Like no one's making good plays. Not that individuals are quitting, but as a group, they're all starting to think individually. Like, I got to do this, I got to do that. What's best for me? And so as a team, they're not playing very good. Dallas is still individually thinking, but playing as a team. And that speaks to the message that they're able to do from Mike Zimmer to Coach Mike on the offensive side to the special teams. And so it was a good win, and I think a very needed win for the Dallas Cowboys in order to hopefully keep the synergy together there going into 2025.
All right, so they win 4 of the last 5, but they've been officially eliminated from playoff contention. As you mentioned, no longer in the hunt. That's always my favorite graphic you see every week. What does that say about Big Mike and Mike McCarthy? If you're talking with Steven and Jerry Jones, What are you advising based on how the team has still kept it together, even though once you lost Dak, you kind of knew they weren't going anywhere?
Yeah, and I felt that same way. It was enough. Losing Trayvon Diggs again, just a huge loss. Obviously the injuries during the season at different positions, it's just been bang up. And, I think you've got to realize that change for the sake of change doesn't mean better. And don't just change because it sounds good. What's your plan? And I think if you look around the National Football League and you look around all the different offensive coordinators and the systems, do you feel like Coach Mike is good enough and to take this team to where it needs to be? Yes. Has he done it? Yes. Have they had poor showings in the postseason? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think he's the wrong person. And then you think about the defense and how it's had to evolve from Coach Quinn to Coach Zimmer. And those guys are completely different types of people. And yet they're starting to get the same, consistency out of that defense. And Zimmer's learning his players just as much as Quinn knew those players. So I think they look at it, and I would be, if I was Will McClay or their assistant GM or in that personnel department, I'd say I'm comfortable staying with the same ship, the same crew. Yep. Let's go and talk to Coach Mike after the season, have a 2 or 3 year extension on board. I don't think Mike's going to go out there and get a 4-year deal from someone else, and I don't think that's what he's looking for. I think Mike wants to win in Dallas as well. So I think he stays. I think they keep the band together. They run it back in 2025, including Dak Prescott, including Mike, and maybe it includes a deal for Micah Parsons as well.
Yeah, I think it's very salient advice that you'd give to Clay and Steven and Jerry, because I'm with you. I look at it this exact same way. Like, you fire Mike McCarthy, you lose your offensive coordinator, your play caller, all of that. He does all of those things as the head coach. And then Mike Zimmer, as you mentioned, you're probably cleaning all of that out. You're really starting from scratch. So you win 12 games. All the injuries that you mentioned, Zach Martin, the Hall of Famer to be, gone for the year as well. Overshawn, very talented young linebacker. I'm with you, Mark. Like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Let's calm down there in Dallas. I know everybody wants heads to roll there in Big D, but I think Big Mike probably has earned another year, and as you mentioned, maybe a short-term contract to stay as a head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. All right, Mark, much more to get to here in GM Shuffle. Some teams still on the outside looking in. We'll discuss next here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Back here on the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik here with you. And Mark, outside looking in, this is not where you want to be on that bubble right now. And it feels like in the AFC and the NFC, maybe we've got our 7 already. But if somebody from the AFC is going to make a run, I wonder if it's going to be either the Colts, the Dolphins, or the Bengals. All those teams right now sitting 1 game under 500. They got to win their last 2, and they got to get help from either the Chargers or the Broncos going forward. So it feels like a tall task. But if you gave all those other teams truth serum, isn't it the Bengals that none of those big boys really want to see get into the second season?
There's no doubt about it. Of those 3 teams, if you're telling me who I don't want to play if they make the postseason as a 7th seed, it's absolutely the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow is having an MVP season on a losing record, and it's just hard to imagine that you could have the numbers he has and still have the record they have. But that's what they are, and that's what they're sitting. But they still have a shot to get to the postseason, and nothing better than playing the Denver Broncos this upcoming week. I mean, how huge is that? That you can control at least 1 week of destiny, or control 1 week of your final 2 weeks of the season to say, hey,
yep,
we belong in the postseason. And so there's lots of pieces as we kind of unpack this of how important this game is against the Denver Broncos. Clearly, Denver wins and this thing's settled up. You're right,
yep,
because that's really the only spot that anybody's looking at or can look at is that one. I think that, to try to capture the 7th, obviously in the NFC, it's trying to figure out who's going to win the divisions, right? Is it going to be
yep,
Rams or the Seahawks, or is it going to be the Atlanta Falcons or Tampa Bay? The rest is set. That's locked. So those are interesting races, but this is a real one. And we've got teams that have some easier roads to win those last 2 games. And I'd say the Denver Broncos have a tougher one depending on their final game, Kansas City. So there's so many things that are at play here, but I think the Bengals absolutely are the toughest team, the toughest out. If you play them, against Denver, I think that they're going to do well against Denver. I think that they're a team that still sees, look, we can still make it. Even if Miami wins, Indy wins, Cincinnati still wins, it's going to make for a very interesting, week 18 in the National Football League, which is what everybody wants. But I think that's what's going to happen. Denver has played well, certainly scored points lately, but Cincinnati to me is more of a juggernaut. And yeah, if they get in somehow at 9-8, boy, I don't want to be the 2 seed. I don't think I want to play the Bengals. I think I'd rather play the Chargers. I'd rather play somebody else than Joe Burrow's Bengals.
And that's the deal. And by the way, Bengals open 3-point favorites. That total, as you mentioned, 50, very high, expecting a lot of points between Denver and Cincinnati. If Denver, as you alluded to, loses to Cincinnati, they would then play Kansas City in the last game of the regular season. We don't know if Kansas City is going to wrap things up on Christmas Day to get that number 1 seed and that high ankle sprain of Patrick Mahomes against Pittsburgh. If Pittsburgh wins out, which includes Cincinnati in the last week of the regular season, then Pittsburgh wins the AFC North. Mark, there are so many twists and turns to this thing. Denver's got to be kicking themselves thinking, man, we let the Chargers off the hook last Thursday night, and now they got to figure out a way to either beat Cincinnati or Kansas City to make sure they're in. That's a tough test.
And no way I started my career in Kansas City with the Chiefs. Denver's pretty. It's up there with Chiefs Raiders. There's no love loss. It's not the same for the Chargers. It just doesn't have the same feel. But Denver and the Raiders, there's something to that. The unique thing is the Denver Broncos have to be cheering for the Kansas City Chiefs against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Right. Because Andy Reid has a history of benching his players. You can go back to last year when they were still looking for jockeying for positioning. And Blaine Gabbert walked out there for the Kansas City Chiefs, instead of, had a chance to not just win, but try to get the 2 seed or the 3 seed. Andy Reid's like, you know what? It's not worth it. I want to get my team healthy in the postseason. It made sense and it worked, right? They got the world championship. He'll do the same thing. If Kansas City's in a position and they don't need week 7 or week 18, but their 17th game, Denver's sitting there going, okay, we got to beat Carson Wentz now to make the postseason. That's all we've got to do. That's a nice thing. So Denver is actually big Chief fans this week, which is hilarious. But there's so much moving point, right? I mean, if we can get the Pittsburgh victory in Kansas City, then now week 18 is full of just so many games that the NFL is going to have a hard time figuring out where to structure which one so it doesn't tell what's happening with the other one. So it's hard for me, not as much as I grew up a kind of a Steelers fan, certainly got my start with the Kansas City Chiefs. I feel like I can't lose in this Christmas Day. I'm glad it's on, but what an intriguing game. But, this is a lot of playoff positioning that we're going to get to see here in the next 72 hours.
The Chargers with that great second half comeback to beat Denver. Again, what we're trying to do is if you're Indianapolis, if you're Miami, or certainly Cincinnati's got a more clear-cut pathway because they play Denver. For Indianapolis and Miami to hope the Chargers lose their last 2, it's at New England and then the Raiders. That's not a plausible scenario. If anybody falls out, it's only Denver, right?
It feels like it. I mean, it should be. You would think that the Patriots are playing better. A year ago, you had Aiden O'Connell. He was, killing the Chargers. I think he threw 4 touchdowns against the Chargers. Right. And now Aiden's back and he's healthy, but, it's not quite the same Raiders team. And now they just lost Max Crosby, too. So this Raiders team is certainly, or not just lost, but they've lost Max Crosby. So this isn't the same Raiders team as a year ago. So it feels like it's hard to imagine the Chargers. They're in good shape, and it is what it is. The more unique thing is I think Miami and Indy both have a pretty fair path to getting 2 victories as well, and so everyone's just kind of waiting to see if this Bengals Broncos game, can the rest of this matter, or is this going to be wrapped up by the end of week 17? It's fascinating, but I don't think it's a better position than to see the Bengals have to play the Broncos, and it's hard for me to imagine most people don't think the Bengals can win that.
Yeah, I mean, Miami's got easy schedule, Cleveland and New York, the Jets, but they're both in the Northeast. And I can always see Mike McDaniels already is cold on the sidelines. He looks like he just wants hot chocolate and to go home, Mark. He does not enjoy the cold temps. In the NFC, when you look at the NFC North and the Lions get an easy victory against the Bears, Minnesota gutty win against Seattle. First of all, Jared Goff did like the trick. I'm falling down, but I'm not really. Come on. That's elite. Like we're tricking the defense by faking a falling down and then finding Sam Laporta wide open because the defense thinks that Jared Goff that plays over. Is that just really good coaching by Ben Johnson? Or all right, we're not falling for that ever again?
That's pretty good coaching. They had a kind of a similar play previously, and a lot of people were like, well, he put his knee on the ground, he's down. Not in the NFL, you're not. Until you're tagged, you're down. So I have a feeling they kind of felt that other play going, if we actually put that into a play, that actually might work where we make it look like he fell down. I got to give him credit. And, I think that's one of those things where they sat around the room and just go, we could do this. This actually could be something. So I like it. It's a, Bill Belichick would have done it. People would be like, oh, he's a genius. Look what he's done.
Right.
But it wasn't Bill Belichick. So now it's somebody taking advantage of a situation saying, yeah, and it could be a copycat. Like it's one of those things where did somebody else kind of play that same game? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard, because you're not sure exactly what's going to be said. He's down. You hear stuff on the sideline. If you're a DB, what your eyes may see might be like, oh, wait, he just went down. I can let up, or let me go see if there's going to be somebody closer up that I might need to go cover. So, it's a lesson that everybody gets to watch and try to coach, play your game all the way through the snap. But certainly interesting that way that played out. And, happy for Sam Laporte. He's had a quiet year. If he starts to heat up too, yikes, maybe Detroit make it through these injuries they've had so far.
Yeah, I mean, boy, the Lions aren't tough enough to stop, and then you get that type of play call there. It's almost impossible. Very quickly, the Vikings and Sam Darnold, his contract situation. We know it's a one-year deal this year with Minnesota. Mark, what do you think the Vikings will do from a front office perspective with Sam? Is it we still have J.J. McCarthy, and I know Sam it's working with KOC, but that's kind of the point. It's KOC. What do you think happens there in the offseason?
Well, I mean, you do have the tag. Which is never the best, but it's a good number. And so it's not like Sam Darnold's walking around not making any money. You have that to consider. And I think Minnesota's in a financial spot where they could consider using the tag. You could look at it from I don't think it's going to be Baker Mayfield inexpensive, but it could be a Baker inexpensive. Because I think if you're the other clubs that are in the market, whether it's the Raiders, it's the Titans, it's the Jets. Well, not the Jets. The Jets will not sign Sam Darnold. That will not happen. But maybe it's the Giants. You've got to really make sure that you think Sam Darnold can play outside of this system, like in your system. Or if you're going to make a change, you might want to hire somebody from this system and then bring in Sam Darnold. A la if you're the Raiders, right where you are, Dave. If you're saying, look, I want to get Sam Darnold a quarterback, and I'm not going to put him under Antonio Pierce. I'm going to change the head coach. I'm going to get an offensive coach, play caller, and I'm going to sign as somebody that Sam Darnold knows or is understanding of Sam Darnold, and then I'll bring Sam Darnold to the Bay or to the Vegas area.
Former San Francisco guy.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. But that's the way I would do it. I think if you just are the Titans and Callahan's your head coach, you're like, hey, look, I love Sam Darnold. He's going to be great in our system. I'd be worried about that. Not that he can't do it. It would just give me a little more pause. And so I think you're going to see something in that realm, or the Minnesota Vikings just play the stay for a year or two. Like, let's do a 2-year, $80, $90, $100 million deal, which is a lot of money. And maybe no one's out there paying that kind of money. Maybe everybody's like, I like Sam. But it's like Baker Mayfield. There wasn't really a market for Baker. So the Bucs kind of threw in the bone. He took it, and now there would be a much better market for Baker. But it was kind of like people have tried him, and he had success. He certainly played well for Tampa the year before, but people were like, that's just Baker, pulling a year out. Same for Sam Darnold. I think it's going to be an interesting market. I think he goes somewhere, but I think you have to bring the system with him.
By the way, Vikings still get the 1 seed in the NFC if they beat Green Bay at home next week. Not an easy task. And then win at Detroit to wrap it up. Mark, can you believe they're even in a position to get the 1 seed? They're 11-1 dogs to win the division, let alone be the 1 seed potentially in the conference.
It's amazing. If they get it, they earned it, right? That's going to be the big thing. If they can get that, they've absolutely earned it. But in terms of having to finish out with the Packers and the Lions, good grief. I mean, that's as much as you could ask for, right? So, incredible year. Did not see it coming. Couldn't have seen it coming. Great for Vikings fans, and obviously makes for a great NFC North. But yeah, I did not see this season. Hardly anybody did, right? I mean, but for them to be in position to have the number 1 seed, when you think about the 49ers and you think about the Eagles or what the Cowboys could have, certainly Detroit, whether it's the Rams who made the post, this is probably the one team who's like, nah, maybe they find a way to the postseason, but then when their quarterback goes down, hard to imagine it all.
It's amazing that they're 13-2 and not in first place. It's still the Lions. That's how good Detroit's been as well. When we come back, Mark, we got 2 games on Christmas Day and 1 the day after. That's next here on the GM Show.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Back here in the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik here with you. And Mark, maybe the comeback of the day was the Commanders on Sunday in D.C., shocking the Eagles. Jayden Daniels. I don't know what else we can say about this kid. It felt like maybe Bo Nix was in the conversation for Rookie of the Year. Mark, that conversation's over, right, after what we saw Sunday?
Yeah, that conversation's over. I mean, this is Jayden Daniels' rookie award. He's earned it. He's put this team in position to, battle the way they have to win that game. I mean, it was crazy. It was like throw an interception, touchdown, throw an interception, touchdown. Like, it was just nuts how this game played through. 22 points in the fourth quarter by the Washington Commanders against the Eagles defense. Hard to see that coming. A game that clearly, obviously, the Eagles kind of squandered. And a tough loss, but, great for Jayden Daniels. I mean, what a remarkable season he's put together as a rookie. And the high completion percentage, the amount of passes he makes, what he can do with his legs. It's a lot of fun to watch a young player like this.
I don't want to say the Eagles, conversely here, maybe their chance to get the number 1 seed in the NFC has gone by the board here. If Detroit and or Minnesota win their last 2, that would mean Philadelphia cannot get that 1 seed. Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise. And then we saw that Jalen Hurts sadly got hurt, and he's got the concussion. We don't know about his stature against Dallas, and they still have to win the division. I mean, yes, it looks like they're going to be able to do that, but that's not done yet either. So I know you'd like to rest him, but Mark, if he's cleared, like, you got to play him, right? Because you still have to win the division.
100%. This comes down to the doctors and the neurosurgeons and the concussion protocol and everything you have to do, and whatever that says, you do. So if they 100% clear him, great. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's really no gray area. I wouldn't, based off of where they sit, wouldn't be, as long as he gets cleared, I'm not sitting there going, boy, 1 more week just to make sure he doesn't get another concussion. You can't play football that way. You just can't. Tua put himself back out there, right? And so you just got to know that if he's been cleared, he'll be playing. If he's not cleared, he can't play. Thankfully, this is different, right, David? I mean, it's so different than, he's got an ankle, as with Patrick Mahomes, or, he's got a broken, maybe non-throwing hand. Can you fight through that? Or this is one of those ones where either he gets through protocol correctly or not. And that's kind of where we sit. Eagles certainly need him and need him to play. And I would say, I was on the outside. I was like, look, this team's 1 injury away to Saquon Barkley, and they won't win. Oh, you know what? Losing Jalen Hurts really hurt a lot more than I even realized. And I don't disrespect him as a player. It just seemed like everything was Saquon Barkley and his 1,800-plus yards this season. You felt like it was all because of him. Well, it's a combination, and it always is. And yet Jalen, probably that's why he was so frustrated a week ago. He's like, did you like that performance? Because he was like, I'm here actually playing well, and now I'm not there, and we lost. And so I think it validates how good Jalen is. But, I mean, what Saquon Barkley means is tremendous. And I am going to digress into a random thought, but Saquon Barkley's got 1,800-something yards, right? And he's got 2 more games. O.J. Simpson did that in 14 games. 14? It's just, when you really think about 2,000 yards in only 14 games, here's Saquon. He's got 15 games. He's still 150 yards short. When you really think about 2,000 yards in a 14-game season, back when you kind of were going to run the ball, right? The throwing was cool, but it wasn't what it is today. You kind of knew, I got to stop O.J. Simpson. No one could. It just goes back to one of those records. I wonder if one of those top 10 records of all time that never will be broken.
Yeah, because really we're talking about Saquon breaking Eric Dickerson's record, but really, as Mark laid, it's really O.J. Simpson's record, and we don't talk about that for obvious reasons that have nothing to do with football anymore to celebrate it. But you're right, the electric company, Buffalo Bills, O.J. Simpson, that's as good a individual and team with that offensive line performance that you're ever going to see. And Saquon has been lights out, 12-1 to win the MVP. It just feels like it's almost like ignored. Like, what do you get, 250 against the Commanders? But because they lose and because he kind of got shut down in the second half, he still went over 2 Bills yesterday, and nobody's talking about that.
Yeah, you actually got the 150 yesterday, and it was it was a quiet second through third quarter, but he's still at 150. Yeah, no, it's 150 yards, and you don't even talk about it, right? It's like, oh, well, that's Saquon Barkley. That's what he does. But he's got 2 more games. It's fascinating to watch. But Jalen Hurts, to get back to the main point, obviously it's a combination here. They need him desperately to be back on the football field to be able to hold on or try to keep that number 1 seed, which everyone in the NFC dies to have. If you think about, like, because if Minnesota gets it, you get to play in warm weather. You got a dome, right, every time you play. If Detroit gets it, same thing. But if those Packers get it somehow, or certainly if this Eagle team gets it, that's a different outcome in terms of where you'll be playing your game.
But I just gave him an extra 100 because every time he seemed like in the first half he touched the ball, I thought he was going to go for another 100. It's amazing to watch him and then shut down in the second half. You look at this class. This is something you and I talked about on VSiN by the books on Monday, and that is you look at this draft class quarterback-wise with 6 quarterbacks taken in the first 12, and then you go back to the 1983 class, which is the heralded class of all time, with 6 quarterbacks taken there. And Mark, as we pointed out, normally you're just hoping to get a starting quarterback. Out of those 6, half of that class went to the Hall of Fame. So they got that pretty darn right. We can't make that comparison, right? But so far, not so bad for these 6 rookies.
Yeah, I mean, it's the last time. I think this is interesting on the parallel here. It's the last time, like you said, 6 quarterbacks have been drafted in the first round was 1983. And yet we saw that. And, the unique thing is, thankfully, LA won a couple Super Bowls. It's 3 Hall of Famers, but not as many Super Bowls as you'd think. In this class, I think the unique thing about this class is as we're watching it unfold, certainly we don't know about JJ, and we're just going to start to learn a little bit about Michael Penix. But Drake May has played very well. As a rookie with New England, he has played well. Caleb Williams had moments like yesterday, even though the Bears lost, he looked like a legitimate franchise-type quarterback. They just have to continue to work to get things around him settled up, and he's still got to play more consistent. Bo Nix has been, I think, outside of Denver, one of the guys that most people have been like, wow, he's really played well. And he has. He's put them in a position to get the postseason. Jayden Daniels is going to be the offensive rookie of the year.
Yep.
So, like I said, we'll still learn a little bit more about Michael Penix. So all of them look like they're like, the franchise looks back and says, wow, we picked the right guy or we got a good quarterback. Everyone could feel that way, I think, still as we sit here today. That's an amazing statement. And so when you take 6 quarterbacks, it's been 40 years since we've done that before, and you have success and all 6 look good. How many are in the Hall of Fame? Who knows, right? I mean, my goodness. But, could one of these guys kind of blow through? This is huge. This class in the 2020 class, where it was Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts was in that class, Tua was in that class, Jordan Love was in that class, Justin Herbert's in that class. Those 2 classes, 2020 and 2024, that's almost half the quarterbacks in the National Football League out of just 2 classes. But that is going to be the lifeblood of this league for the next decade, which is great. So happy to see it. Amazing to see. And for the fact that a couple of these guys have a chance to put their team into the postseason and beyond, really impressive.
It is amazing. As you mentioned, LA getting those back-to-back championships. He went to 5, right? Went 2 and 3. And out of the remainder of that class, you had 3 other first-round picks in 83 get to the Super Bowl. Of course, Kelly got there 4 in a row, loses all of those for the Bills, right? Dan Marino only went once. Got the L against Joe Montana in San Francisco. And Tony Eason, yes. The Patriots had to go. Somebody had to get beat by the Bears that year. It was Tony Eason. So the rest of those guys, 0-6 in Super Bowl appearances, but still an amazing draft class to behold. Mark, if I made you redraft today, and we don't know what J.J. McCarthy's going to look like yet, but I still feel like that's why they're talking about obviously moving on from Sam Darnold, because they think they know what they have, kind of like Atlanta with Michael Penix. How would your redraft? You don't have to go through all 6, but I know you felt strongly coming into the draft, and I don't know that that's changed.
Yeah, no, I was very adamant on SiriusXM, on different outlets that I had. I was Jayden Daniels number 1. I felt like he was the best quarterback in this class. I know it sounded crazy with Caleb Williams and everything walking in, but I knew Jay Daniels of a work ethic, of what he was about, work ethic. I didn't know Caleb because I didn't get around him. So I guess the guy I knew better was the guy I felt more comfortable with. If I were to redraft it, you should take Jayden Daniels number 1 overall. It doesn't mean that he's going to be number 1 in 10 years from now, but right now, if you had to reset it, I would reset it. I think Drake May's probably played more consistent and better and Caleb Williams. And so I think Drake May would be there. And I think if Drake May had a supporting cast around him, some of these wide receivers like a Keenan Allen or a running game, or a tight end, he's trying to make it all happen. There's not a lot of, think of if you play fantasy football, how many Patriots do you have on your fantasy football team? Probably zero. Right. So, I mean, if you think of it from that perspective, that's what they get to do with Drake May. So I think Caleb probably falls more like number 3, number 4. And I think the only reason you would put JJ and Penix towards the back end of 5 and 6, because we just haven't seen much, but doesn't mean I didn't like what we saw. And so I think that's unique that you might take Caleb Williams and put it at the 3rd or 4th spot right now instead of the vaunted number 1 that it was unanimous at the time, it felt like.
The Giants right now would be on the clock for the April draft if the season ended today. Daniel Jones is not walking through that door. He's in Minnesota, ironically. Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito. I mean, it looks like they don't feel like they got a quarterback there, Mark. Do they have to draft quarterback, even though the quarterback draft, like we're talking about, felt like it was last year?
Yeah, do they have to draft a quarterback? Yes, they're going to need to get a quarterback. Do I think Sanders is the number 1 pick in the draft? Right now, I don't know how Travis Hunter is not the best player in college football. Like, I just can't imagine he's not the best player and the number 1 pick in the draft. He clearly, to me, is the best player in the game. And, but quarterbacks move up the board. You've got to decide, is that a Giants move? Is Sanders the Giants type of player? I don't know yet. But I feel like he's not the best player. But I think the Giants have to look at this and go, how else can we solve this problem? Who are the players out there? The Sam Darnolds, the Kirk Cousins, those kind of guys that are possibilities as well. And Daboll knows that it's got to probably be a quick fix because they can't have another season like this, or they won't be the head coach and may not be the GM there also. So, could they go more the veteran route and say, hey, look, we're going to do this, and if we get a quarterback in the 2nd round or 3rd round, great, we'll take him, or something like that. I think that's more likely right now. I think you'll hear from the message outside the Giants building how loud they're talking about the different ways they want to address it, or does it sound like there's not a lot of talk? Because if there's not a lot of talk, then that means I think they're leaning more towards the draft.
That's fascinating, because I know Giant fans are going to go, Mark, no, we have to take a quarterback. And I think you're saying, well, if the value isn't there for that number 1 pick and you can utilize it better as a GM, maybe that's the way you're going to look. So Giant fans, relax. Long way. You don't even have the number 1 pick yet, Giants fans. A long way to go before
we'll find a way to mess that up.
When we come back, we'll get our crowning moment of the week. That's next here on the GM Show.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
It is the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik here, coming at you on a Monday. And Mark, you've got a lot of options this week for the crowning moment presented by DraftKings. What is the moment that stood out to you, sir?
Yeah, there was a lot of choices, right? There were some big comebacks, big games, performances. But mine was, I think you have to choose somebody that's still in the postseason hunt. I think that's a part of it because it's so important that you've got to, kind of be in it. So mine was a fun one. And it was, I think, Jonathan Taylor had a miserable week last week with the fumble out of a guy that's so out of character, just living on that and knowing that might cost them the actual postseason. The way he responded talk about having a big game. The yardage he had, 250, whatever. But the first touchdown, he took that thing into the tunnel. Like, he was not going to let that ball go whatsoever. And then the better part was, in my opinion, was watching the players around him as he came back out. Everyone was trying to strip the ball as a joke, trying to be funny with him, knowing that this was the plan of attack. But, I think Jonathan Taylor wins the award on multiple levels. Number one, kept the Colts in it, had some big, huge gains, big, huge runs, but then also the fumbling and the way he carried the football to the back of the end zone or to hand it to a ref. We've talked about this a little bit, but to me, he had the big impact this week.
And again, you can't get that game back against Denver. That's the hard part, right? It was Denver. And, right. You scored 17-0. It kind of feels like maybe you're putting a dagger in the Broncos. And now that's ironically the team you're still chasing here. But you liked it because you mentioned it seemed out of character for Jonathan Taylor, right? I know he had the contract issue with the Colts and they had their spat. But when you see that performance he put up against Tennessee, That's still an elite running back in the game when he's right, correct?
Yes, and it is completely out of character on Jonathan. He's one of the good dudes in the National Football League. So really sad that it happened to him against Denver, as you said. Like what the impact that was and overall impact that might be, hard to say. You hate to point to just one thing and say that's the reason why they didn't get in when you could look at a whole season of the thousands and thousands of plays that could also be part of the whole thing. But it's just so in your face that we'll see what happens with the Colts. But it was nice to see him rebound. Good things happen to good guys. He's a good guy, and that was a good thing that happened on Sunday.
Yeah, you got to learn from your mistakes, and Jonathan Taylor made sure not even my teammates are not taking away that ball. That crowning moment is presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours, and it's for Jonathan Taylor this week. Let's get into the Christmas Day games here a little bit. We got 3 games here during the week before we get to the weekend slate as the holidays are upon us. It's a massive one to begin in Pittsburgh with Kansas City going there to the Steel City. And you and I talked about it on VSiN by the Books a little bit too. Like Patrick Mahomes, you and I, we said it a week ago. He's going to play, America. Not only did he play, he was great against Houston. Do you expect him? No reason. You're still trying to lock up that 1 seed. Patrick Mahomes is going to go, even though he wasn't crazy about the scheduling, with 3 games in 11 days.
Yeah, I mean, I expect Patrick Mahomes to be out there. The team that really is playing for less is actually the Houston Texans, right? It feels like they're kind of made their bed and lying in it. And so it is what it is. They're pretty much stuck at the 4th seed. And we'll see how they handle the game. But the Chiefs need this game. They want to be able to go to Denver and rest their starters. They want to be able to have that long week. It's not going to be the 3-game stint that Patrick Mahomes is talking about. And so I think that they can cap it right now. And Andy Reid can give this team a break and then be ready for a long break because you play week 18, you get week 1 bye. So you're talking about 3 weeks off from the football field. You want to be healthy, get into the postseason. That's how you do it. That's a great opportunity. So this is a huge game for Kansas City. I'm sure Patrick Mahomes will be out there, and it's hard for me to look at this Chiefs game. This Chiefs team is an anomaly in the fact that they've never scored more than 30 points in any game this season. And yet you've got that win total. That is incredible. It hasn't happened that I can remember. I don't know the last time it's ever happened. And I mean that like in 40, 50, 60 years, no one's gotten this many wins without at least scoring 30 or more than 30 points in a game. And so incredible feat by them offensively, but also more defensively, that every week their defense has to keep people at 30 or less points to win. And they've been able to do that in this day and age with these offenses are scoring 40 and 45 and 48 points. Kansas City's done a good job of keeping everybody under wraps. So amazing story on that one as well.
Yeah, and the only time they scored 30 was in the overtime. They took extra time to get to the 30th point on the touchdown against Tampa Bay to win 30-24 on that Monday night. So you mentioned Houston. They're going to be the other Christmas Day game here as they're going to be playing host to Baltimore, 4-point home dogs because we saw the injury to Tank Dell. We know Diggs obviously has already been long gone for this offense. I mean, it feels like now it's C.J. Stroud, it's Joe Mixon, and it's Nico Collins, right? I mean, is that enough to beat Baltimore on Christmas Day?
Not the Ravens. The Ravens are too tough. I just think they're too good of a football team right now. So, yeah, when you think about where they're going to play and playing a Ravens team that can just beat you on the ground so bad with Derrick Henry and certainly with Lamar Jackson, but then they take you over the top with Bateman and Zay Flowers. This is a team that knows what they are. This is why Harbaugh's been the head coach for so long. This is why, DeCosta, who's the general manager, came from Ozzie Newsome. They understand what they want to do offensively, and they draft the pieces for it. And they've been consistently doing it for a long time, especially when they got Lamar. They're like, look, this guy can kill you with his legs. And that's why I said in the offseason, I said Derrick Henry would be the biggest influence as a free agent. It turned out it might be Saquon Barkley. But I think when you look at Derrick Henry, you look at Saquon Barkley, you look at the different running backs, Josh Jacobs. Yeah. And you look around the National Football League in terms of free agency, Aaron Jones in Minnesota, the impact that they've all had on their football teams has been tremendous. And yet we're trying to say, well, the running back market's devalued. It was. I don't think it can stay devalued. I think you're going to have to start pushing that number up a little bit more because you see just those 4 running backs alone, how big of an impact they've had for the clubs that have acquired them. And so this is even another one where you're saying, wow, the Derrick Henry effect is real. And so now when they're playing the Houston Texans this week now, that's why I said with Houston, they're the one that's kind of the more confusing. I think Baltimore has so much more to play for, and I think Houston really needs to play with. And so if anything, I think D'Amico Ryans could take his foot off the pedal a little bit here and start to say, wait a second, we can't afford any more injuries on offense. We've got to get to the postseason healthy because losing Tank Dell is a huge piece of their puzzle. I know he hasn't had the season that we all thought he would have, but he still creates a lot of problems for defensive coordinators that they don't have to worry about that anymore. And so I think in anything, that's why I think that the Texans could be taking their foot off the pedal, and that's why I like the Ravens, to win this game.
Not exactly what Steeler backers want to hear, right? That, you're going to take the foot off the gas against the Ravens. They might not have a choice, to your point. They just don't have enough walking bodies. It reminds me of Friday Night Lights. Give me a running back. I mean, you're looking for bodies to get in the game here because we're just running out of receivers, it seems like, left and right for C.J. Stroud and company. The day after Christmas, you get done, you've had your eggnog, you've opened up all your gifts. You get Seattle and Chicago. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, man, Seattle, 2 weeks ago, it's looking good. 2 weeks later, not as good. So coming off 2 straight home losses to Green Bay and then the really tough one to Minnesota, you got a first-year head coach coming over from the Ravens and Mike McDonald. How does he get this team to go on the road to have any hope of still winning the West? It's got to start with a win against the Bears and then a win against the Rams on the road for the last 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I mean, Coach McDonald's done a really good job with this team, in terms of taking it over and trying to give it an identity. And defensively, they've been playing pretty good. Obviously, the game last night was a tough one for them. Geno Smith and company, they've got to run the ball this next week. They've got to just, they've got to get through the games they should win. They should beat the Bears and then say, hey, look, it's all or not, let's go. But this is a team that's, it's gone through this transformation, or it feels like it's going through this transformation in the middle of trying to turn the roster over while you're still playing with the Geno Smith. And it's surprising to me. Like, I'm proud that to watch the Seattle Seahawks continue to be competitive. Yep. And the roster feels like it's getting flipped is a very hard thing to do, yet they are. And I don't think they're done flipping over the roster. Clearly, they're going to look for that quarterback of the future somewhere. But right now, I think, putting the ball on the ground, running it, controlling the clock, playing the defense, I think that they're going to play, especially against the Caleb Williams, who I don't think will play as well as he did this last week against Detroit. I think that they'll have a shot to still win this thing. I like the Rams. When you talk about teams, here's another team that's completely turned over the roster, except basically the quarterback. Yeah, they're young on defense, they're young on offense, they're young just about everywhere, it feels like, and yet they've been competitive now 2 years in a row as well. It speaks to Sean McVay and what he's been able to do out there. So I like the Rams to win the division and hold on to it, but Seattle, hats off to what they've been able to do, and I think they'll make that game in Week 18 meaningful, and that'll be one of the ones we'll see because it's just going to be playing you're in probably, and that's going to be a great opportunity.
Yeah, you mentioned it with the Rams. They're going to take on Arizona, who's been mathematically eliminated from the postseason contention with their loss to Carolina. So you got a team that's got nothing to play for against the Rams, has got everything to play for. Bears, nothing to play for. Seattle, everything to play for. That's the matchups you're going to see here in the final 2 weeks of the regular season. You mentioned Caleb Williams very quickly here, Mark. What have you seen out of him? I don't know that Thomas Brown has done anything since Thanksgiving. It feels like that was a year ago when Matt Eberflus and Caleb had the meltdown at the end of the game with the clock against the Lions. Have you seen anything out of Thomas Brown that say this could be the head coach? Or are they really looking outside the organization?
I think they'll be looking outside the organization. I think you've seen a little bit here, but I think you want to open this thing up. It's all about the quarterback and making sure you get the right guy. And just take a step back on the Rams. They can clear all this up. If they can win next week, obviously they've won the division and they can sit everybody and they're good. And actually they'll have enough wins that they'll already be locked into the 3 seed. So the Rams could really kind of take care of everything. In terms of Caleb Williams, you have to open this thing up. But as I think with the Jets and I think with the Bears, they're going to hire. If you hire a defensive coach, shame on you. And it doesn't mean that there's not a good defensive coach that can't be a head coach. It's that you've got to get the quarterback figured out in New York. You've got to get the quarterback figured out at the Bears, and it's time to get an offensive player in there that that can mesh with that quarterback. So that way, if you do have success, you get the right defensive coordinator, and your quarterback starts to play well, and suddenly that guy becomes the hottest ticket to become a head coach somewhere else, and suddenly you got to reset everything. I think you got to think long term on this one, and I think you need to cut the ball in half and say, hey, look, here in this team, we're going to go offense, and I think that's what the Bears need to do.
Yep, we've seen it, right? It did not work with Matt Eberflus defensive-minded guy there. He wasn't there, obviously. Then you get Caleb coming. I mean, it's all these moving parts. You got to get somebody symbiotic with Caleb going forward if that's going to work in Chicago. Mark, great stuff, man. Thanks for joining us here in the GM Shuffle. Always appreciate your time and your expertise.
Love being on there with you, buddy. Look forward to the
Thank you very much. Mark, Dominik, Dave Ross, thanks for watching the GM Shuffle presented by DraftKings and Visa.